What the f is that? What the fuck is that?
Like, wait, holy shit, I did not look. What the fuck?
I got a
What?
little bit of an army guy.
Hello everyone, my name is Borax and I've been on a mission to play and rate every single champion in the support role. Today we'll be looking at Bel'veth, a champion that has been talked about as a support here and there, and one that I've played all the way back on the PBE, as well as recently, of course. Let's quickly go over her abilities and then find out why she could work as a support. Her passive makes her auto attacks 36% faster than the median champion, but her on hits are reduced by 75%. She also gains a permanent stack when she kills a large minion, and 2 stacks when she scores a takedown on an epic monster or champion, which gives her permanent stacking attack speed. Also, whenever she casts an ability, she gains 2 stacks of something known as Death in Lavender, which lets her walk through minions and gives her bonus attack speed, but consumes the stack when you auto. This is pretty insane in bot lane fights, where the minions can normally be pretty annoying to deal with. Next she has her Q, which lets her dash at a target and deals damage. You can cast this in 4 different directions, but each one has its own unique cooldown, and there are also basic attack resets. This is again a very strong ability, as you can look to go in and then get out with the other charges of your Q. Then Bel'veth has her W, which lets her slam down her tail in a target direction, knocking up all enemies hit, and slows them by 50% for a duration that at max rank scales to 2.25 seconds. Also, if you hit an enemy champion, it resets your Q's cooldown in the target direction, so you can Q with Bel'veth, follow it up really quickly with W, then Q again forward if you need to keep chasing. She has her E where she enters a defensive stance, and she can't move or attack for 1.5 seconds, but also grants her lifesteal, and more importantly 70% damage reduction, and she attacks all nearby enemies dealing bonus damage based on targets missing health. This 70% damage reduction is no joke by the way, as Alistar ult gives him 55% damage reduction at rank 1, but for a whole 7 seconds, and at max rank it grants 75% damage reduction, but Bel'veth at early levels gains access to 70% damage reduction, while also dealing damage, which is quite incredible. Which was true when I initially made this script, but due to personal issues delaying this project, she got hit by the nerf hammer, which rightfully reduced her damage reduction at base rank to 42%, and now you have to max it to get back to 70%, and they also reduced the base damage, which hurts Bel'veth as a support even more, but still, 42% damage reduction is still decent, but nothing compared to the 70% damage reduction, which was just absolutely bonkers. Finally, she has her ultimate, which apparently has a passive that I legit never knew about. It grants her basic attacks an on-hit effect that applies a mark to the target, and every second attack against the marked target deals bonus true damage and generates a stack of Endless Banquet that increases this damage, which explains that when I hit the same target multiple times, it seems I can end up shredding them, which I also guess makes sense why Tank Bel'veth has some merit, as being able to stay on top of people will lead to an increase in your damage. Like I said before, Bel'veth Support has been talked about by some people, but is she actually somewhat viable? Well, let's find out together as I rate Bel'veth, the Empress of the Void, on her ability to be played in the support role.
I am the voice of the silence.
In the early game, I like to rate a support's ability to invade lane and roam. Invading on Bel'veth is kind of awkward. If you could start level 2, it would be really strong, as you could dash forward and then knock people up. That being said, you could still start W, and then look to flash forward on some unsuspecting enemies, as the hard CC combined with the slow is quite nice. If you were protecting against the invade, you could consider starting E, as having that damage reduction while gaining lifesteal and dealing damage is pretty ridiculous. For invading, I will give Bel'veth a B+. She's pretty decent, but honestly her W is not the fastest spell. It doesn't have great range, meaning enemies will have a ton of time to react if you do look to go for some cheese early on. Now let's talk about laning. I like to judge a champion based on 3 categories: poking, peeling, and all inning. Bel'veth is a weird champion because she is technically melee, but her whole kit is ranged, albeit pretty short to medium ranged. Now here's the important moment where I have to mention that Bel'veth's W has 125% AP scaling, which is absolutely bonkers, and her ultimate damage actually has 100% AP scaling, so of course when I first was playing her, I had to try her out AP with Comet, and honestly it's surprisingly decent, especially because with the knockup and slow, you almost always land the Comet damage, and you have a really good trade pattern of dashing forward, then pressing W, then using your remaining Qs to back out before they can trade back. Now I will say, while yes her AP scaling on those 2 abilities are pretty ridiculous, those are her only AP scalings, and it requires you to build a lot of AP items for you to really feel its usefulness. Also, while Comet is decent, it's nothing compared to the power of PTA Bel'veth, as she can proc it so easily because each of her Qs gives a stack, and her E also stacks it almost instantly, and this will enhance both her and her ADC's damage very nicely. But if you are running PTA, you are going to look to all in more often than not, so for poking I will give her a B-. If you want to go Comet, it's more like an A to A-, as that Comet damage is again pretty good, and the fact that you have no mana lets you trade quite decently in terms of resources. But you will lose to the longer range poke supports for sure. When it comes to peeling, Bel'veth is once again surprisingly decent, as her W knockup in a line can either CC people, or force them to try and juke it, which will delay their advances. She can also buy a ridiculous amount of time with her E, granting her that damage reduction that can enable your teammates to come in and save the day. Overall for peeling, I will give her an A-. The fact that she has 4 potential dashes gives her a nice amount of flexibility to move in to help your ADC and then still get out. She is also hard to be focused down because of that E, making her not a great target to go for. Her weakness comes from her lack of healing or shielding, as well as her CC not being point and click like some other supports, and if you miss it, which you will from time to time, then she can definitely struggle to get out of a sticky situation. Now all-inning, my all-time favorite category, and something I do way too often, which is why a champion like Bel'veth is perfect for me, because she's a literal monster in the early levels. Jumping forward and landing your WCC then grants you another ability to jump forward, and if you land the Qs and weave in some autos, which should be easier to do thanks to the extra attack speed from her passive after she uses an ability, you pretty much get that instant PTA proc, and once the enemy's CC is down, you can try and finish them off with your E, or save yourself from dying with that damage reduction on a rank 1 basic ability that also deals damage. Bel'veth loves playing with other champions that like to jump in, as that is what you'll be wanting to do, and for this category, I'll be giving her an S-. Honestly, I was tempted to put it higher as her early game damage is just ludicrous, but you can run into some problems if you're facing up against too much enemy range, as that Q forward plus W isn't crazy long, so sometimes you might also have to throw in a flash. You could also wind up missing altogether, which will definitely be quite terrible as you have to limp away and hope you don't die from your mistake. I will say the fact that you don't have unit collision after using an ability is pretty nuts in those early fights, as minion block can be a real hindrance, but her passive lets you work around that while also giving you extra oomph on those autos. Now that we've talked about Bel'veth's laning prowess, let's rate the matchups that she might have to face. Now that we were entering the next 50 support champions, it was time to revamp the old matchup tier list a little with new categories that'll have suggestions of what you can try and do when facing up against the different champions. So the first category we have are the impossible champions, which are going to be the ones playing 15 screens away, blasting you and your ADC with abilities, and making you cry. You really can only punish them if they are pushed up, and you're getting a gank, as you will most likely have the HP and minion lead, which is quite scary. Heimerdinger and Zyra can be quite annoying, as they are very anti-melee with their turrets, and sadly Bel'veth has to go in to be useful. She actually does sort of decent against them, as she can tank the turret slightly with her E, but it is still very scary. The next category is the dangerous ones, which contain the hook champions with lots of pick potential on your ADC, as well as good CC to cancel your E, which can be quite devastating, as it does have a 24-second cooldown. Also, you know it's been a while since I posted if Rel has moved from my who plays as champion to pretty much pick banned and competitive, and as someone who has played her and enjoys the insane amounts of CC and utility she provides, I can see why. What you can try and do against these champions is go in if they are mispositioned, or if they use a key skill, making them vulnerable to the PTA Bel'veth. The next set of champions are skill matchups, as they once again have great CC to cancel your all-in, but Leona and Alistar have to go in on your ADC more heavily, and you can try and respond more easily with your W in those instances. Janna is definitely a punishable enchanter, but later in the game she is going to be super duper annoying as she cancels your attempts to go in. The champions you have the potential to do well into are those supports who don't have crazy consistent CC to deal with your E, nor the damage to really punish you if you go in. In the case of Pyke, he really wants to bully you to build a lead, but you have so many dashes to avoid him, which is nice. Now the more mid-range mages are doable, as they're quite squishy, so if you land your knockup, they could be screwed, but if they do land their CC, they will be annoying. Renata, like Janna, is very strong against you in the late game, but I think a bit more punishable in lane. The champions I think Bel'veth can potentially do well into are those pesky scaling enchanters, especially if they try to poke the Bel'veth, as a Q forward into knockup can really ruin their day. That being said, Soraka, Nami, and Lulu do have good CC to cancel your E, which is why you want to play with an all-in ADC, because if they use their CC on you, then hopefully your ADC is able to take over the scrap. Finally, we have some champions in the who plays these guys even, and Skarl will represent Emilio for me, as his list doesn't have him, but I also have not seen that champion since the many nerfs he's received, which is very nice. Now, no joke, the next bit of the script is about what ADCs you want to play with Bel'veth Support, and it's funny because I last worked on Silas, and word for word it is the same, so I'm just going to read that now. When it comes to what ADCs you want to play with, the answers are the ones who can go all in with you and just fully tribal the lane. I like Tristana, Kalista, and Samira for this, as you both have dashes and strong all-in potential. A good Draven would also be a decent lane, although him wanting all the kills might stunt your power level. Although, a caveat I will say is that in my opinion, Bel'veth doesn't need any kills to be successful, unlike Sylas. The last combo I really enjoyed was Bel'veth. Because if you can land that W, he can follow up with his W, and you both do so much single target damage that they will be truly screwed. Now I will say that Bel'veth is actually even better with the champions I listed than Sylas because of the PTA damage she can bring to the table, allowing for her ADC to take another rune while still getting the bonus damage. However, if your ADC is a useless bonobo, then you might want to consider roaming, so let's talk about that now. Bel'veth is a jungler who I'm trying out as a support, and once again should come to no surprise as she's pretty good at roaming. That being said, I actually think her ganking is pretty weak for a jungler, so her roams aren't too insane either, as you do have to go forward with your Q and then land that W for it to be effective. At the same time though, her early game damage is much higher than many other supports, and she can't really be dueled by many junglers because of how ridiculous her E is. She's also amazing for tower diving because you can pop that E right before the turret shot finishes you off to do a very nice play. For roaming, I will give her a respectable A+. I definitely would recommend you go for as many early scraps as you can with your jungler or mid laner, as with most off-meta supports, you will get outscaled by the more meta supports, so finding any lead that you can is incredible. Also, if you can reach level 6 and get a cheeky Rift Herald, that is incredible as you can get the enhanced true form, which lasts longer and lets your dying minions respawn as little monsters that will fight on your side. Just remember that you have to be level 6 to get the transformation, as I might have forgotten in some games, and was very disappointed when I roamed to get a Herald while being level 5. Let's give Bel'veth a rating for her ability to support in the early game, which will slot at an S-. If your ADC trusts in the power of the Bel'veth all in with PTA, and you aren't playing against something that super outrages you, then this pick is incredibly strong in the early game and will catch foes super off guard. I mean, I played the pick so many times, and even I can't believe just how much damage she's allowed to deal, and how strong she is at skirmishing with her kit, even when she doesn't have any items. Even though Bel'veth is a monster in the early game, is she able to remain so in the
We will be waiting.
In the late game, responsibilities of a support electorate include their ability to get picks into teamfight. After the durability patch, it's quite rare to see a support 1v1ing an enemy carry, but if you aren't too behind, it's really not that difficult for Bel'veth to do, especially in the mid game when ADCs are only sitting on 1 to 2 items. The fact that her damage ramps up as a passive of her ultimate really helps explain why you can take those extended fights so well, and honestly PTA puts in a lot of work as well. You can also just get picks in the more traditional way of utilizing your teammates' damage to help you get the picks, as you can dash forward with a Q and then flash Wing someone is some of the longest pick you can actually go for, and the fact that the knockup cancels movement spells is pretty amazing to see, as these Caitlyn's are obsessed with having me interrupt their net. For getting picks, I will give Bel'veth an A rating. You can still very easily miss the knockup as other champions just have point and click CC to secure picks, but the fact that you can fish for a pick by jumping forward, and if you miss, just jump out, is really, really underrated. It also has the potential to hit multiple targets, although such a W would be more fitting of a great opportunity for the next category, which will be team fighting, where support's responsibilities include engaging, peeling, and sometimes dealing damage. That multi-knockup W that I was just talking about is exactly the engage you want from your Bel'veth support. It is honestly quite similar to Alistar in a way, but the advantage Alistar has with his dash forward is that it is point and click CC, which then pretty much guarantees his Q knockup. With Bel'veth, it is a skill shot, and the dash is a bit shorter range, but the W extends a decent amount, meaning you can knock up quite a few people, and they will be slowed afterwards by 50% for 2.25 seconds at max rank, which is no joke, and hopefully your team will be able to play off that engagement. Honestly, the biggest downside of Bel'veth as a support in general is the fact that her ultimate isn't really an active ability and only comes into play after you've already taken someone down. Although when you absorb a corpse, it will slow all nearby enemies and deal some true damage to them, which isn't too bad. For engaging, I will give Bel'veth a B+. A big weakness she has is her vulnerability to being peeled off by enchanters or CC in general. She's also missing a powerful ultimate that can help her engage, which the best engagers normally have, but I truly believe her W is an underappreciated ability, especially when combined with her Q and a flash. The best peeling champions are going to be the ones with point and click CC, as well as some form of healing and shielding for your carry. The way Bel'veth peels is by hoping she can land that knockup, which will also slow the enemy and hopefully give your carry enough time to run. You also want to use your decent damage to try and finish off the threat, especially because if you are being ignored, your damage will ramp up quite quickly thanks to the way her ultimate passive works, as you deal more damage to a target the longer you hit them for. Which transitions nicely to talking about her damage, which Bel'veth is an interesting character. She both does a ton and no damage at the same time. You start melting people after proccing PTA and hitting them for a while, which is why you can 1v1 certain targets if they aren't too far ahead of you, which is quite unique for the support role. She doesn't really have any poke though, which the best damage supports will utilize to deal their damage. That being said, if you do go for the not as good AP build, you can do a bit of damage if your team gets a takedown, and you hit someone with the explosion damage from you absorbing a corpse. Sadly, this is rather conditional, and not that easy to pull off, and while it scales with 100% AP as a support, you won't have the highest raw AP numbers, so it's not very impressive. For dealing damage, I'll give Bel'veth a B+. If you're going after one target, her damage is very impressive, but her damage in teamfights is nothing to brag about, so I can't put her any higher sadly. Before we rate Bel'veth's overall ability to support, let's take a look at the runes and items I would recommend. There are 3 rune paths I see as being viable. I think the best rune option, like I've been saying, is press the attack, because her Qs and her Es proc it so quickly and give your ADC more damage, and it just feels really good in general. Secondarily, I think Revitalize is decent on her for that extra heal power from her W, and then you can take Second Wind or Bone Plating based on what you think would be better for lane. Now, if you want to go for the funny, more unique, but definitely weaker AP Bel'veth strat, where you get good poke off, then I'd recommend Arcane Comet, as she does apply it so easily. The rest of the tree is kind of awkward, as Nullifying Orb can be useless against AD damage, Absolute Focus doesn't do anything if you're low, and while Scorch is nice for early damage, there's a case for Gathering Storm, especially if your games last a long time. The last rune choice you can go for that has decent merit is Aftershock, especially in those harder lanes against engaged champions, especially if you are one of the main tanks for your team. If you get the WCC off, you can then delay your E for once Aftershock falls off to have a long time frame where you are quite tanky, but at the same time, it will be more difficult for you to get kills, which again, an off-meta support should really try and go for unless they have great scaling. Now let's talk about items. Now in Season 14, things are changing, but I'm going to quickly talk about the items for this season in case you still want to play it before the season ends. Now there is a case to go for Spectral Sickle as you can proc it quite quickly, but the minion Execute from Steel Shoulder Guards makes controlling the wave easier for you to then look for roams. If you are going for the AP build, then recommend Relic Shield as Spell Thief's Edge is quite hard to proc when you are squishier. I think early boots is good on Bel'veth, and I usually liked plated steel caps or merc treads based on what damage you are most afraid of. Now the build is quite interesting as you do have PTA, so you might expect a damage route, but I actually think Evan Shroud is the best item for her to help enhance her teammates' damage with her AoE CC potential with her W. Now they did nerf the item a while back and they are getting rid of it in Season 14, which does kind of suck, but it is still a pretty good option for Bel'veth. Like boots, the next item I'd go for would depend on what the enemy's main damage threat is. If they have a lot of AD, then Deadman's Plate is quite good to help Bel'veth get picks and move around the map, and thankfully in Season 14 they still have Deadman's Plate, and it's still a good option. If the enemies have a lot of magic damage, then an item that I've been recently really enjoying is Abyssal Mask, as it's really cheap at 2400 gold, and gives a bunch of MR. It also gives your AP threats MR Shred, which is another great way to enhance their damage, and another item I have built on Bel'veth Support in Season 14. For the rest of the items, standard tanky support items are solid like Knight's Vow. A funky item you can build is Serpent's Feint if the enemy has a ton of shields, as reducing those by 50% is pretty incredible, but will make you quite squishy. Speaking about funky items, let's talk about her potential AP build, which is actually quite strong. Because she has such high AP scaling, a great mythic you could go for is Hextech Rocket Belt, which gives you another dash to catch people out with her W. Everfrost would be nice to increase her CC, but the money being wasted on mana would feel bad. I usually ended up building Night Harvester though, as it's easier to utilize, and the damage spike in lane, if you can get it, really can enhance your poke. I think Medjai's is a really great item for AP Bel'veth, because it's already a really risky strategy, but if you can get a bunch of stacks, then she can be very strong because she loves having raw AP, and then she can protect the stacks with her E, or you can even go Zhonya's to still feel comfortable in going forward to engage, but then you have the safety of the stasis effect, which is the best way to be tanky. Also, Imperial Mandate is a decent item, as it is very cheap, and you can proc it okay with her W, and the extra movement speed to kite away would be nice. But the problem with the AP build is of course just how expensive it is, and without a decent lead, it will definitely fall off quite hard. Now in Season 14, there are way more AP items that are really good. Sadly, I've not really played AP Bel'veth in Season 14, so if you do end up trying AP Bel'veth support more in Season 14, you definitely will have to let me know how it goes in the comments below. But in Season 14, I think a good item build would be something like Abyssal Mask, again if you need MR. Another interesting item that I've been looking at is Trailblazer, where your allies get more movement speed when they're following behind you, which could be a pretty decent option for Bel'veth support. But again, I haven't been able to experiment with it too much. Now that we've talked about the runes and items, let's give Bel'veth an overall rating for ability to support, which will slot at an A. Honestly, in terms of off-meta supports, she's one of the best picks I've ever had the privilege of trying, and I usually did quite well in all of my games. Before the nerfs, I would have slid her into the S- range, as she truly was an unkillable early game menace with PTA and 70% damage reduction. But after nerfing her base damage and the damage reduction unless you max the ability, you really can notice that she does get a little bit punished for lacking levels in the support role. Would I recommend you play Bel'veth Support? Absolutely. There's a reason why people around the community were talking about it, and even when I first played her on the PBE, she felt alright. You do have to be a bit of a psycho when you play her, so hopefully your laner partner is aware of that, so you can dominate, because without an early lead, she can feel a bit weaker, but she has all the tools in her kit to really pop off. And I have indeed played Bel'veth Support in Season 14, and actually did really well in that game. The only reason why I could see her being a bit weaker in the new season is just because of how strong mages might be with all of the new items. So if mage supports are dominating both the mid lane and the support role, then all that range could be a bit of a struggle for Bel'veth. Then all of that extra range in the game could be a bit of a struggle for Bel'veth as a champion in general. Well, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video and leave a like, that would be amazing, and if you would consider subscribing, that would make my day. We also have a Discord, link in the description, so feel free to check that one out if you want to chat. Again, thanks for watching, and I want to wish you good luck and have fun if you're playing Bel'veth Support yourself. You might need it.